You're listening to Learning Leaders Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. On each episode, we sit down with key industry experts to discover more about what's happening in the world of learning and development, from current trends and insights to the most valuable lessons learned along the way. Join us for a fresh perspective on all things training and the best direction forward.
Hi, welcome to Learning Leaders Spotlight, the podcast where we interview the learning leaders of today to help the learning leaders of tomorrow. I'm Leanne Langford, your host of the podcast. I'm the president of Training Pros. Training Pros is a learning and development contract staffing company. We like to say Training Pros, when you have more projects than people, let us find the right consultant to start your project with confidence. I am really excited about my guest today. Our guest is Geoffrey Roche. He is the Director of Workforce Development for Siemens Healthineers. Welcome, Geoffrey.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're thrilled to have you. I can't wait to have our conversation. So first off, just kind of give our audience a 60-second overview of who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, so obviously Geoffrey Roche, have the privilege of serving at Siemens Healthineers as the North American Director of Workforce Development. And inaugural role, really focused on helping, I almost view it as like the external L&D space of Siemens, where we help our customers on all their learning and development needs. So big focus for me is on how do we build a sustainable, future-ready workforce that enables exceptional care. But by background, started in hospital administration, was not actually in the traditional L&D space, but did a lot of work as a leader and then partnered a lot with L&D. And honestly, I just fell in love with so much of L&D. And so I've been blessed to be engaged in a number of different ways in the consulting space, and then obviously even in the higher ed space, and then now obviously in the corporate med tech space.
So there's a lot of stuff to unpack in there. I love that you're doing the customer training instead of the employee training, because that brings a whole nother twist to what we talk about. But you kind of started answering my next question, which is, how did you get to learning and development? What brought you here? Can you expand on what you said and tell us about how you ended up here?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I always tell people, first and foremost, I'm the son of a nurse, and I, came into healthcare really through, certainly the immense influence of my mother. And then, learned when I was a college student how much I enjoyed sort of that combination of healthcare from a policy perspective, but then also from a leadership standpoint. So when I started in my hospital system back in June of 2008, so obviously I'm dating myself here, I was privileged to work for a CEO who really not only was the best leader I ever had from a culture standpoint, but she was also the best mentor I ever had. And one of the things she challenged me with was, you as a leader have a responsibility to embed learning and development for your team. And yes, we'll have a department and a team that focuses on that, but you as a leader also have to focus on it. And so interestingly enough, that was some of the first elements where I was challenged as a young leader to think about what that was like. And so I partnered a lot with our L&D leader. And I'll tell you, one of the best experiences actually of my life was working with our director of organizational development to look at how I could better prepare my team around crucial conversations, which, in healthcare and in other industries is super, super important. I'm a double trained crucial conversations learner. But I'll tell you what was a neat experience is later, just a few years ago, in an organization that I was working at, where I was doing a lot of L&D work in the healthcare space, I had the privilege to actually work with Northern Arizona University to actually build a course with their graduate students and their faculty, and actually have my former director of L&D, who, had mentored me, challenged me, enriched me when I was at that healthcare system. We did a whole course, and it was fascinating. It was like coaching on demand. And she shared our journey, my journey, her journey together, and how much of a benefit that was to our personal brand. And so that was really what brought me into this space.
It's a great story. I love to hear people's stories of how they got here, because it's very rarely, I went to school for it. It's usually, I was doing this other thing and I was just pulled in. And the other thing I noticed is we often don't ever leave learning and development once we get here.
100%. I'll tell you, a dear friend of mine about a year and a half ago said one of the best quotes I've ever heard on this topic. And, he's a nurse leader. He's actually the CEO of the organization of associate degree nurses. And he said to me, we should always look at it from the standpoint of either a child educated is a family liberated. And you can use that same quote and insert a learner educated is a family liberated. And when he said it, he was on a panel that I was moderating among other community college leaders. But his message resonated so much with me from a learning and development standpoint, because it's not just about your family. Yes, it is. I mean, so much benefits when we have a great learning environment for us and our family, but it's also that greater good of society. And I say that particularly at a time where there's just so much scrutiny right now of education, of learning occurring in many different spaces. But what we don't realize is how, like, when I look back on my journey, if I didn't have a CEO who invested so much in me from a learning and development standpoint, I am certain I would not be as big of a proponent of it in the way that I am today. And so for me, it's really just been not just a beautiful space, but it's truly a space where you can see impact and longevity type of impact, almost like legacy type of impact.
That's a beautiful sentiment, and it does the heart good to think that what we do, what we've dedicated our careers to, impacts people for decades and for a lifetime. So let's switch gears for a second and let's talk about what are the biggest changes you've seen in learning and development in the last few years?
So obviously so much change on the technology front, right? I mean, the reality of it is that almost like so much change, you can't keep up with it. I will also say, in addition to that technological change, there's also just been so much more of an emphasis on how does L&D truly, especially over the pandemic and beyond, how does L&D become truly the engine of retention and truly the engine of culture? And, this is a space that I actually talk a lot about because, at least in healthcare, the reality of it is that while we want learning and development to be that engine, that catalyst for a lot of this work, we have to resource it too. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to resource it effectively and appropriately for it to be able to do that. And normally, our L&D areas within healthcare are resourced such a finite, small amount. We're not able to have as much of an impact or a scalable impact, I believe, is necessary. And so I think you have that challenge, right? You've got a technological adoption growth. You have certainly that element of L&D's got to do so much more. And then the other piece I'll say is that we've also seen this element of we have to think about equity. And yes, I will use that word. I know in some spaces we are not talking about that, but it's still super, super important because ultimately when we think about our communities, our organizations, not everyone has the same opportunity as others. And so I come into this space and know that I've had more opportunity than others. And therefore, it's my responsibility to create additional opportunity and ensure others can have opportunity. And I think without question, L&D has been challenged with that as well. And the final point I'll just make is one of the areas that I believe L&D has also been significantly challenged with, and I think this will only continue for a long time, is succession. Organizationally, we have not generally done a great job of succession planning. And here's what I always say on this. If you're in the C-suite and you have not recognized L&D as a trusted learning partner or a trusted learning advisor, then get them into that space. Get them into the C-suite. Have them there. Don't just have them report to a chief human resource officer. Have them actually at the table as a chief learning and development officer. Because what we're really talking about here is career and talent mobility. And that is different than recruitment. That is also different in many ways than retention. It's a very different type of an approach. And I think it's an approach that's absolutely critical, not just for today, but as we move forward into the future.
So yeah, you've covered a lot of stuff there. One of the things that really just, made my brain go off was succession planning. I was in L&D management at GE when Jack Welch was the CEO, and succession planning was an annual event, and it was a huge deal. And it took many, many hours and lots of meetings, but we literally would figure out who would replace each and every person in the organization. And then we also said, she's almost ready to replace this person, but what else does she need? Let's do a development plan for her, that type of thing. And it was a big deal. And so as a learning and development person, I worked extremely closely with the site leader and the HR leader to try to figure all of that out for the whole organization. It's a lot. And I just don't think any organizations do that.
No, I think you're right. And it's interesting you share that example. My stepfather worked at GE, and he has shared many times with me sort of how regimented learning and development, leadership development was like at GE, particularly under Jack Welch as well. In fact, he gave me a book once and said, "You got to learn, you got to read about this from Jack Welch himself." It's super fascinating to your point, right? I think similarly in my hospital system, where I was for just around 10 years, we had a very structured personal and professional development plan process. And every leader was expected to do that with their team quarterly. And then as part of the annual review, it also has sort of a cascading and a rolling up and rolling down effect. And then every executive was to do it with their team. And then obviously at the highest levels, the CEO did it with their team. I can't tell you enough of how I benefited from that. And I know how much my direct team that I had the privilege to be their leader also benefited from. So much of that personal development plan is what allowed me to get some of them promoted into other growth opportunities. So much of that is also what allowed me to help them find better opportunities outside our organization when there wasn't the right opportunity for them in our organization. In fact, I will remember a time, and I'll never forget this time, where our chief human resource officer and our director of HR challenged me to say, why would I help an employee find an opportunity outside of our organization as compared to finding one in the organization? And I looked at them and I said, well, A, where's the opportunity in the organization? If there is, you tell me and I'll retain him without question. But I knew there wasn't, because when we did his personal development plan, I knew his goal and his dreams were to go external. And I'll never forget the conversation when I said to him, it's okay. And he said, yeah, but I don't want to leave you. I don't want anyone in the organization to feel like you're the reason I'm leaving. And I looked at him and said, well, first of all, if that's the case, I don't care. Second of all, I want you to find the right opportunity for you, because you have a future, you have a family you want to raise. And my job as your leader is to help prepare you for that. He went on, found a great job. He's been still doing that role in the same industry now for several years. And when I look back on that, that was the benefit of the personal and professional development. That was L&D doing exactly what L&D should do. And me as a leader following and partnering with them and aligning with what they should do. That's how we should always be thinking.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so let's talk about the future now. Where do you think learning and development is going in the future?
Yeah. So I think, look, I truly believe that we have sort of a dynamic occurring in many organizations, I think should have occurred a long time ago, where leaders, and I'll even say at times board members and shareholders, are starting to really understand that the function of L&D is so much more than it was ever viewed. And I say that because we're starting to see so much emphasis put on culture, so much emphasis put on people development, so much more emphasis put on career and talent mobility, additional emphasis put on things like apprenticeship and work-based learning and experiential learning, all of which, frankly, is the L&D field. I have thought, again, as somebody who came into this in a very different way, that L&D is too humble. We don't generally walk around and tell people about all the incredible and impactful and transformational work we're doing for people and for the organization enough. And that as leaders are starting to see what that is like, they're starting to say, oh, well, we've got to elevate. And so I think the future represents significant elevation of the function. I also think it definitely represents how do you leverage scalable technology to help scalable solutions with still people in mind. I tell people all the time, don't get so concerned about the technology. Look, at the end of the day, you still need people to do this work. It's a matter of how do we use the technology to augment and to further amplify the incredible work that we do? How do we ensure that instead of us doing minute details, we can let the technology do that so that we can do the bigger details? And what I mean by that is we still need coaching. And I'll argue I don't want to be coached by a technological thing. I still want that human to human interaction. And in a space like healthcare, there is nothing more important than human interaction. That's why healthcare starts with an H. It's about humanity. And so we need that function. And so I do see continued increased focus of the role. And I certainly hope to see more at the C-suite. And I also hope to see more executives at the highest levels that don't just believe in it, but actually preach it. Because I do believe that when you invest in it, you absolutely see the ROI, but L&D needs to be able to talk boldly about that ROI and not just continue to be humble, because it's my opinion that all the work I've done in the years, L&D truly is the transformational leader of most organizations, and we just don't talk.
So I do agree with you. That's really good insights on where we're heading. Let's shift gears for a second and talk about who was your most influential professional mentor and why.
So I obviously talked about my former CEO, without question, most impactful executive, most impactful leader and mentor. And there's so many reasons why, but to be succinct and clear on this, she was a leader that reminded me of a couple things. A, don't ever forget your humble beginnings and leverage those humble beginnings throughout your career to impact others. Second, remember why you're here in the first place, and that's to serve others. And don't forget that. She was a CEO that worked her way all the way up as a nurse to become the CEO, but she never forgot who she was as a nurse first and foremost, and was always dedicated to ensure that care was always provided at the highest levels. And again, I'm not a nurse, but I'm the son of a nurse. And what she challenged me with is to never forget that I grew up, with the immense support of a single mother. And I needed to always think about how it was and what it was that I as a leader could do to help another person, regardless of their circumstance, to achieve their dreams and their hopes and opportunities. And so I am always thankful to Kathy for not just her mentorship, but her challenges to me. And I will never forget when I won an award several years after graduating from college, from my alma mater. She was there. And, I remember actually when I accepted the award, I made some remarks, particularly that I believe that I was getting this award in many ways because of her. And she quickly afterwards said to me, "Come on, no." And I said, no, it's the truth. What you did for me was absolutely transformational. And so I'm always thankful to her.
So I love that story. And I think it's wonderful that you tipped your hat to your mother as well, because as a single mother myself, I can tell you it is very hard to be father, mother, breadwinner, everything for the children. It's a lot.
I will always tip my hat to my mother because, to your point, right? There's so much that you learn. And obviously now as a single father, there's also a lot that I've certainly learned from that. But I'll tell you too, to your point, right? One of the things I learned from my mother is like persistence and perseverance. I saw, I can remember I went to many bring your child to work days with her, my brother and I would. And I tell people all the time, those bring your child to work days, there's no question of the impact that they had on me when I thought about, I can remember in college, no way did I want to work in healthcare. And my mother would never push it. But it was actually an academic advisor that said to me, you talk all the times about healthcare, like do an internship, do a work-based learning experience. Then I did, and I was like, okay, that's where I'm going. But I know when I look back on that, at that experience of all those bring your child to work days, it had influence. Now, the irony is that the same hospital I started at was that same hospital my mother worked at. And so when I started there all the way through my tenure, so many of the people that I work with had worked with my mother. My mother was not there when I was there, but her imprints, her impact was so well known. She was there for 13 years or longer. And obviously so many of these people remembered me as young Geoffrey that got to come in, and then I was there for, just under 10 years. So
it's an amazing story. And yeah, I've been looking up. So this will be aired later, but all week there's been Take Your Daughter to Work Day posts online. And I was only taken once because back in the 70s, it wasn't, every year. And plus I had sisters. But I remember every single thing that I did that day when my father took me to work.
Yep.
every single thing. And he was an entrepreneur and he was in sales, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And
That's
it really
awesome.
did impact me.
That's awesome.
Um, so what do you think is the most important skill today for people to have?
I would say adaptability. Adaptability comes to mind because there's just so much ever changing in every space, every industry, and certainly in our world. The other I would say is being a connector. I think of, one of my mentors is by far, in my opinion, one of the best chief learning officers in the world. You may know Hillary Miller, or of the name Hillary Miller. Hillary, a dear mentor of mine. And Hillary has said to me many times, Geoffrey, you never understand how much of your superpower is connection. And, when I look at how connecting others and connecting with others has benefited me in my career, but also my life, what I realized is in some of our darkest moments, some of our most challenging, tumultuous times of our life, it's those authentic connections that truly come to aid and be there for you, or be there for me in ways that we never would anticipate it. And sometimes it's actually people that we've never met in person, but we've connected on LinkedIn and connected in other ways that are there. And we can't forget that enough. And then the final I would say is strong communication. At the end of the day, being a strong communicator is super, super important. What's interesting in my opinion, and I've actually thought about doing this as part of my doctoral research, I still haven't decided, but it's my opinion that in a lot of ways, L&D are some of the best communicators, but we doubt ourselves a lot. And so I've often wondered whether we have more imposter syndrome in the L&D field, and whether organizations have created that or not. I don't know, but I've often just wondered that because I know I'm a self-doubter. I know I'm somebody who will doubt whether I can do this or doubt whether I'm going to accomplish it. And then you go out and you do it. And we do it over, time and time again. And so those are some of the thoughts that I think are super critical.
That's interesting. I've not thought about us as a field having imposter syndrome. Interesting. I'll have to think on that one. So let's shift gears again. So where do you find your industry news and information?
So many spaces, for sure. Obviously in the healthcare space, specifically focus a lot on get a lot of information from Becker's. Becker's is a very well-known kind of publication within the healthcare space that covers all gamuts of healthcare from, learning and development to service line type of information. Certainly also a big fan of Healthcare Dive. They've got HR Dive, so it's a publication online that covers a lot of different things as well. And then certainly I also get a lot of information through just a lot of other trade associations and, of the conferences and such that I get added to a lot of lists. I definitely am the type that loves to get information around best practices and different examples and case studies so that as I'm thinking about this, especially in the work that I do, how do I get those examples shared? Because ultimately to me, there's nothing more important than a scalable, story that could just have a ripple effect across the country.
That's great advice. Our listeners definitely are gathering information about where they should be looking for information. One of the things I always found was keeping up with reading up on this industry can really take some time. So you have to really understand where's the best place to get new information.
Yeah.
Keep abreast and keep current. Okay, now the last question is a very selfish question for me. This is the one that, because I'm a huge reader, what is one book you'd recommend everybody who wants to be an L&D leader read?
Yeah. So obviously, in my opinion, there's no question of the benefit of reading Dr. Keith Keating's book, The Trusted Learning Advisor. And why I say that is that this is a space, and Keith and I have been on many panels together and have talked a lot about this, particularly in the healthcare space. This is a space where we have to stop being order takers, as Keith says, and we have to really be these leaders that are telling our organizations what we need to do. And I think that he's 100% right. When I look at so much of my career, my experience, this is a function that has just been told, hey, we need this. Please do this, instead of us telling the organization, no, this is what you need to do. And again, that gets back to that humility part that I've talked about a lot. And I think it's time for L&D to be bold. And I also think it's time for L&D to show the pioneering spirit that we all have and challenge our organizations, because ultimately this is not a time for status quo. And I would argue status quo has been being just that order taker. It's actually time for us to be risk takers and to really challenge the thinking and just give it a try. It may not work all the time. Just give it a try. I try to remember, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had an amazing quote, ended, shortly with the idea of just above all, try something. And, I think when you think about that, it's so applicable to where we sit in the L&D space, because we need to have impact. And I believe if we continue to just be order takers, our impact is so minimal. But when we take an opportunity and cherish it and own it, we have so much more opportunity.
So I love that book. And I've heard Dr. Keating speak several times. In fact, we have him come and speak at our local events. We do. One of the most impactful things I remember him saying the last time I heard him was, instead of trying to get a seat at the table, make your own table. I was blown away by that. I'm like, whoa, mind blown. And he's done just that at his organization. And so I can't wait. He's got a new book coming out in June. Can't wait to read that one.
Yep. I to your point, I love that. He says it all the time. He and I were just on a webinar together, and we, not that I should admit this, but oftentimes when we're on webinars, we're like texting each other throughout it, just preparing for what he's going to say. I don't know if he wants to make sure that I smile or whatever, because I'm very facial, but I think that statement, to your point, is super, super important, because far too often we haven't had a seat at the table, and we've seen the impacts. It's why culture is so challenged. It's why retention has not been as strong. It's why succession planning is not as strong scalably. It's why, we have employee engagement challenges and so much more. I'm not suggesting that just a seat at the table is going to fix all that, but I am suggesting that a seat at the table certainly is going to have incremental steps and progress towards fixing, as compared to not being there. And we've all seen it.
Well, it has been a real pleasure talking with you, Geoffrey. You've had some great insights, and seriously, I've got some things I'm going to have to go back and think about, maybe try to read about. Imposter syndrome in our industry is an interesting concept. You've been a great guest. As a thank you for appearing on our podcast, I'm going to plant 5 trees in your name.
Mm.
We plant trees as our charity here at Training Pros, and we've planted 5,000 trees to date. On behalf of our clients. So I appreciate you joining us this week. And that's it for this week's episode of Learning Leader Spotlight. Please tune in next week to hear from another learning leader from another industry.
Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode, and leave us a 5-star review.